Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me for this, the second to last session in our volunteer festival. So we are going to do some baking. Well, I'm going to be doing some baking. You're hopefully going to be getting some inspiration into some ideas for some baking, suggestions, some tips, perhaps for your own baking at some point. So I'm just going to come off of the PowerPoint, and there we go. So ready to get baking. I've got my ingredients all set out. So I am a bit of a freestyle, shall we say, baker slash chef when it comes to cooking. And so I have weighed out all my ingredients. I'll talk you through those, and I do have the recipe for the cookies on a slide for you, so you don't need to try and remember that, the ingredients for that. So the recipe, or two recipes really, that I'm going to share with you today are for a Fairtrade cookie that I make this recipe very frequently. They're known locally as Sally's famous Fairtrade cookies. I can't claim to have made the recipe. It does come from a Fairtrade cookery book that I have, but it is a very well used recipe. And so it is a favourite. I like to make these cookies for all sorts of occasions and give them to friends and family, wrap them up nicely and give them to friends and family. So let's get started. So I have my bowl and my sieve all ready to sift my self-raising flour. So here I have got 275 grams of self-raising flour. And what I'm actually going to do this morning is I'm going to be making two different types of cookie, but I'm going to make the cookie base, and then I'm going to split it in two and then add the ingredients to it. So I find that's the easiest way to make it. And then you can have different flavors to enjoy, or perhaps you're catering for people who have different likes and dislikes when it comes to cookies. So that's quite a good way of doing it. So I'm just going to start off by pumping my flour into the sieve. I always find sieving flour is probably quite a boring step in baking, but I always think is quite an important one. You don't want any lumpy bits of flour in your baking, whether it's cookies or cakes, whatever it might be. I also find a metal spoon is really quite handy for that as well, to help push the ingredients through the sieve. So I'm just going to carry on with my flour. So the flavors I'm going to be making today are cinnamon and raisin, a bit of a classic cookie recipe there, cinnamon and raisin, and I'm also going to be doing chocolate cookies. Now, the chocolate cookies I'm going to be making today are a bit of an experiment. When I was sorting this out yesterday evening, getting all my ingredients ready, making sure I had everything I needed, of course, the chocolate mouse had been in the cupboard and had eaten all of the dark chocolate that I was planning to use. So I hope the mouse enjoyed it, but that means that we're now going to be having milk chocolate and hazelnut cookies instead of the dark chocolate and ginger that I had planned. But so, as I say, a bit of an experiment, but always good to get a bit creative in the kitchen, and we'll see how they turn out. And I think that's what's really great about this cookie recipe, is that the dough, as I say, is really quite versatile, and you can just have an experiment, see what flavors you enjoy, what kind of things you like in your cookies. I've made these at Christmas time when I put dried cranberries and white chocolate in, kind of spiced varieties where a bit of mixed spice, cinnamon, ginger, that sort of thing. Anything that you like, or as I say, if you're making these for other people, anything that you know they enjoy is always a good option. So I've sieved all my flour in, nice and smoothly in there. I'm then going to add in my sugar. Now I'm using Fairtrade Demerara sugar, and this is 150 grams. I'm not actually going to sieve this Demerara sugar because I don't know if anybody's ever tried to sieve Demerara sugar, but it doesn't work very well. It gets stuck in the holes. depends how big your sieve is, I suppose, but mine just isn't big enough. So I'm just going to tip that in. I'm making sure there's not any big lumps in it. So I'll just make sure and pour it in from a bit of a height. And that means any lumps will get broken up. So that's just my flour and my sugar. I'm just going to give that a quick mix to make sure it's all combined together. And then the last ingredient for the cookie dough, I did say this was quite an easy recipe, just 3 ingredients in the cookie dough element of it. And so the last ingredient is some butter. Now, the only thing that's potentially not difficult, but that you have to remember about this recipe is to do a little bit of prep. So I took this butter out of the fridge. I keep my butter in the fridge. I took this butter out of the fridge last night. So it's nice and soft and squidgy. So it's melt in the hand, as well as hopefully the cookies will be melt in the mouth. Well, when I enjoy them once they've come out the oven. So I've also cubed this. So this is 225 grams of butter. I tend to use unsalted butter in my baking. It's really, I suppose, down to personal preference, which you prefer. But I'm just going to tip that in to my bowl here. And there we go. So I'm just going to give it a quick mix with the spatula, and then really there's only one way to do this, and it does involve getting my hands stuck in. So I think it's really the only way to get things really well mixed. So I'm just going to get in there and give things a good mix, good squidge together as well. So it's just until it all comes together into a dough. It takes a minute or two, but it's well worth the effort. I think it's, as I say, the best way, I think, of getting everything combined together. And this is really where you have, having made the effort to soften your butter, it really is the important step in this. So you can see it's starting to come together there. I'm just putting one hand in the bowl. The bowl's not quite big enough for me to get both in, and actually I find it's quite easy enough with just one hand to combine everything together. So make sure you get right in there and gather everything up from the bottom of the bowl. You could, I suppose, use a food processor if you want, and if you didn't want to get your hands in there to bring everything together. But I also think this helps give just a bit more authenticity, shall we say, to the homemade, handmade feel that we're going for. And certainly, as I say, if you're giving them as gifts to people, it's quite nice for them to know that you've put a bit of love and effort into what you're making them, so that they can enjoy that. So just bringing that together, and yes, this butter is nice and soft, but it is we are getting there with this. Really what we want is, I suppose, to give you a bit of a reference point of what you're looking for is nice, smooth. You will feel grains in it with the Demerara sugar, obviously. It's a bit grainier than other sugars, maybe castor sugar, muscovado sugar is another good one. Having tried this recipe with other types of sugar, I think the Demerara, the recipe suggests just to give the cookies a bit of texture, a bit of crunch to them. They do work equally well with other sugars. I've tried them with muscovado sugar, which gives a nice bit of flavour to the cookies, but castor sugar, white castor sugar would also work well. If you've not got any of those granulated sugar, it's really just about getting the sweetness in there, I suppose. So feel free, have an experiment, play around, and indeed play around with the flavours, but just please let me know what you try and what works. If you've got any new ideas, it's always good to hear from other people. And as you were enjoying the soundtrack to the Great British Bake Off at the start, I'm sure there's some weird and wonderful ideas that appear on there. So maybe some of you are feeling brave to try some of those out in your cookies. So do let me know. So I'm just going to rescue the bits that fell over the side. I was getting a bit enthusiastic there with my mixing. So having come together, we've sort of got a almost Play-Doh type texture, I suppose. But as I say, with the grains of the Demerara sugar in there. So as I said, I'm a bit of a freestyle baker. I think when it comes to baking, what I find is it is a bit of a science with your measuring and weighing of ingredients. That can be important. but with certain elements of it, I think just try it and see. So I'm just going to roughly separate that into 2 parts. I'm going to pop half in another bowl for now. I'm just going to put that to one side. And then what we're going to start off with is actually the cinnamon and raisin cookies. So I've got about half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon in here. So I'm just going to put that over and then give that another good mix, again, just with my hands. That's probably the easiest way to get this combined into it. And this is the point at which I always feel Zoom is lacking. So the smell of that cinnamon is amazing. Unfortunately, I realize that I can share my sound, I can share my video, I can share slides, but I can't unfortunately share the smell, and unfortunately also not the taste. So you are going to have to make these for yourselves, I'm afraid, to enjoy a sample of them. So just finishing off mixing in that ground cinnamon, and we will have a look at that. So I'm not going to get too precious about it being thoroughly combined. Some of the cookies will have a little bit more cinnamon in than others, but I think that's the joy, as I say, of homemade, is not every bite is the same, and that makes it a bit more interesting. Now then, I've got some sultanas as well, a small handful, I would say. I don't know what it would be weighed, but yeah, as I say, a small handful. I'm just going to sprinkle those over and then mix them in as well. I'm going to make a bit of an effort to mix these in because I don't want a cookie with no raisins and a cookie with all the raisins. So I am going to take a bit of effort to mix these in as thoroughly as I can. And then I'm going to just pop this to one side. And then I'm going to move on to the chocolate version. So that's my other half of the cookie dough there, just as the same as that previous one. And then I've got 50 grams of milk chocolate with hazelnuts in it, Fairtrade, of course. And I've just broken it roughly. I haven't been too careful about breaking it into chunks. This broke up quite easily in my hands into the squares that are marked out, but then I broke it down a little bit more. But really what you want is sort of bite-sized chunks. There will be a little bit of melting of the chocolate in the cooking process, the baking process of the cookies. Depends how chunky you like things. I quite like having a nice bite of cookie that's got a big chunk of chocolate in it. That's what I enjoy most about chocolate chip cookies. I'm not one for chocolate chips. You can use chocolate chips, but I prefer something a bit chunkier when it comes to chocolate. So I tend to use a bar that I've broken up into little pieces. So let me just mix that through. Again, I don't want a cookie with no bits of chocolate, and a cookie, well, I would love the cookie with all the bits of chocolate in it. That would suit me fine, but whoever got one without any wouldn't be too pleased, I don't think. So that's my 2 cookie doughs. So the chocolate, milk chocolate and hazelnut one there, and the cinnamon and raisin one there. And so now I've got 2 baking trays. I use these silicone kind of baking sheet covers. You can use baking paper, obviously, as well. Just give it a covering. You don't want the cookies to stick to your tray at all. So now all I'm going to do is just roughly divide the dough. So I've just halved this one here. I'm going to half it again, and then I think half again. So that will mean that we get 8 cookies out of each bowl of the cookie dough. So if you just bear with me. So I'm just, the recipe that I'll share with you in a moment does actually say this makes 30 cookies. Now, I don't know who they're making cookies for, but that to me is a bit mean. I don't think the cookies are particularly big if you get 30, given that I'm going to get 16 out of this. I think they probably have half sizes, I suppose that would mean. So yeah, you can make them as big or as small as you like. They will obviously spread in the oven when they're baking. So do bear that in mind, particularly when you're spacing them out on your baking tray, to make sure that you've got enough space for them to move around. So I'm just rolling these into rough balls. I'm sure if I was actually on Bake Off, they would want them perfectly round and perfectly shaped and all the same shape and size, but I'm not too fussed about that. I'm then just going to press them down with the back of a fork so that they start off a little bit on their way to forming cookie shapes. So that is my chocolate cookie. And then I'm obviously just going to do exactly the same with the cinnamon raisin ones. So here we go. So again, I'm just going to roughly divide it into 16. This is obviously the fun, messy part of this process. Well, both in terms of getting your hands stuck in to do the mixing part, but then also this part to roll things out as well. So, giving myself or giving the cookies plenty of space on each of the trays to melt out as they will. And again, if you're not particularly happy with how your ingredients have sort of spread in the process, when you're rolling them out, you can obviously do a bit of redistribution if you need to as well, so that they've got lots of nice, even ingredients in them. So there we go. I've got a tray of cinnamon and raisin and a tray of chocolate. So while I just go and pop these in the oven next door, I'm just going to pop up for you the recipe so that you can have a note of those. So this is just the recipe for the sort of the cookie dough, if you like. So this is just for the sort of the dough part. Obviously, you can add in whatever ingredients you wish. So I'll give you one moment to have a look at that, make a note of that.